Hello and welcome to the show. It's your host, your favorite business coach, Robert Lyon. Today, we have the great privilege of talking to Greg Wieting. He's a healer. He's helping people all over the world with depression, mental health, just all kinds of great stuff that he's doing. So, Greg, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you're up to?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Robert. Yeah, so I am a healer. I work with trauma, neuroscience, and energy medicine to help people address the underlying trauma patterns that are creating anxiety, depression, chronic pain, often the pain that people haven't been able to think or talk their way through. So energy medicine is really a vehicle that's helping to kind of address the subconscious, unconscious imprints of trauma stored in the body. We're not able to think or talk our way through. Yeah, I'm most compelled working with leaders, a lot of leaders who've built kind of their platform, their success, but often kind of reaching a point where they're realizing more of a trauma response has been leading them and driving them. And so kind of reaching that stopping point of burnout and emptiness and overwhelm. And kind of looking at well, what if it's more important who I am, and how I'm showing up? What if that's just as important as what I'm doing?
So my parents are hippies, man. So I've been like energy healing for a minute, but I'm getting more, I'm realizing the more and more power. Okay. So we're going to go down a bit of a rabbit hole. I'm going to share just kind of my experience. Maybe you can tell me if I'm totally wrong or if I'm doing something kind of right. Right. So I've got, I don't know, the whole past of my life was trauma. So we'll just leave it at that or whatever. But I'm learning now that if things are coming up in my life, like if I wake up thinking about certain things or pains and that sort of emotion, that I should actually embrace those feelings and I should actually feel the emotions, right? This is how I heal myself in a way. I'll feel that emotion, right? And I'll feel it to its absolute, all right? And then I'll hold it in my chest for a little while and then I'll kind of just let it go. And I feel like that's a cleansing way for me to kind of get over past traumas because we never know when past traumas are going to kind of pop up. And that's personally what I've kind of found to heal myself. And I know there's lots of other things. Do you have any input on that? Or is that kind of a way that you think you can help other people do it? Or what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what you're saying is spot on. I think that's very important. A lot of my work is helping people feel their pain, right?
Right.
When the imprints of trauma are often too much too fast, right? So adverse experience is just too much for us to process and metabolize. So we freeze, we stuff it down. So, we kind of lose access to our upper brain of logic and reason and default to kind of a survival brain, right?
Oh, that's powerful.
That survival brain is telling us, wow, that's too dangerous to touch. Like, I can't feel that, right? So what you're saying and your ability to kind of pause and just be with the experience of the emotion is coming from a pretty regulated place. Like your nervous system has enough capacity to feel that experience. So
Yeah.
a lot of us, if we're harboring, a lot of imprints of trauma, may not yet have that capacity to be with the pain. So we want to broaden the window of tolerance so the nervous system doesn't move into like hyperarousal, that fight flight response, or the hypoarousal, the freeze appease response. So we can have the capacity to all right, let me just ride this wave. Let me sit with this experience. And that enables the system to start to metabolize it, process it, make sense of it, get some insight. What's the message beneath this emotion? There's often some intelligence and, wants us to make a decision, set a boundary, get a need met. And so kind of helping to slow all of that down so we can start to gather all those data points and make sense of them.
The human body is just so weird. You got to admit it at some point. But ever since I started doing those healing things, I do feel better. I have great insight afterwards. As you said, we get out of the animal brain. We kind of get some clarity, I guess. So I was in the army, and I had PTSD. So I literally I had to figure something out to actually get with the day. Otherwise I'd wake up in this state where today is going to be weird and I don't want that anymore. So I had to process so much. And through that process of healing, I feel like a lot of people, the first thing is people don't necessarily, they give up on healing themselves. I think that's a big problem with the world today. There is options. There's things that you can do. And yes, I'm talking about, what we're going to talk about is a little bit higher level, but just starting the process of embracing your feelings and then letting it go. Give yourself 5 minutes to really feel that pain and feel that whatever, and then let it go, and then try not to let it bother you anymore. You can really go to different levels and find new levels of getting back to being happy, getting back to it being a place where, you know, life is great. Life can be, even if you're in the deepest, darkest shit, if you can find things to be grateful for, maybe first you have to process that emotion. And that's also just an experience. I think not enough people talk about how being depressed, being anxious is another experience. And you can just kind of laugh it off at some points and just be like, well, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what it is. It's awful, it's horrible, but it's still something about life that is interesting that I can learn something from. But
what I'm hearing from you is, yeah, these are experiences. And I think what becomes a problem is when we start to identify with experience, right? So the mind training of healing is really differentiating between self and experience, right? But we'll often say, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I'm overwhelmed. So then now our identity is embedded in experience. And the mindfulness-based practice helps us to create space and distance to say, no, I'm Greg, and there's, you know, a cloud of anxiety about me today, right? So it's like, you know, we identify with the weather when actually the weather is forever changing, right? And even if it's a completely stormy day, it's like who I am is the empty sky beyond those clouds, right? But we forget that. The mind is a tricky thing to get to know, especially when we have trauma on the brain, because the imprint of trauma is continually encoding fear, survival, isolation, alienation, danger. Right. And that's just feeding into our negativity bias, which is we're always scanning for danger out of survival. So much of healing is the mind training to reorient from pain to possibility, you know, from survival to actually life, right? Like there's so much life out here. Instead of so much danger, there's so much possibility, and locating safety and resource and capacity and connection.
I feel like there's something that I don't do. Okay. So I'm an entrepreneur. I just work my brain, you know, I just go all out at stuff, and then I burn out and so on and so forth. And I'm just now thinking that, well, maybe I should only work till like, you know, 5 or 6. And then I should take a couple hours of self-healing, of time for myself to get back, you know, and I'm kind of wondering, it's like, are you ever going to be fully healed? I don't think so. I think you can always be healing yourself, always be improving. And people don't do that though. People need to start doing that. So what would be your tips to maybe do some self-healing, or what should people be doing to not burn out and to just kind of keep on the righteous path of getting better?
Well, yeah, I think that healing is nonlinear. I don't think it's a one and done. I don't think it's a final destination. But, you know, for me, I'm all about a trauma-informed lens and really acknowledging where people are at. And so, you know, if you've been on a journey, may I speak into what you just shared about yourself?
Yeah.
You know, so if you are experiencing PTSD from, you know, past experiences, you know, and you've learned how to shake off a bunch of that through just tracking your own body and awareness, you know, right now, like overworking might be just the next strategy that's helping you navigate. And I would never want to make that strategy bad or wrong, because it's probably better than alternatives that might have been available in the past. But it's like just continuing to help your system develop that capacity to let the nervous system land. And then, once your nervous system feels like it can land, I love the imagery of a seaplane, right? A seaplane like touches down on water, and then it bounces up, touches down on water, bounces up, and it takes a while for the seaplane to land, right? So I imagine your nervous system is far more balanced than it was in the past. And it can probably continue to find more of a baseline of safety and stability. So it's really developing strategies and tools to first help the nervous system land. Embodiment's a big piece, you know, like the bird that flies into the window and you think it's dead, but it's just frozen, right? It's in shock from the trauma. So how much of our own consciousness and identity is still in shock from imprints of trauma? So kind of thawing that out so we can kind of just live in our own bodies, right? And that, you know, when we can live in our own bodies, interoception, that's presence and that's agency, right? So as we have more presence and agency, then instead of defaulting to, say, the overworking burnout, you know, strategy, we can say, actually, no, I'm gonna clock out at 5 and I'm gonna, you know, go for a walk or go to the gym or do whatever self-care, do whatever, you know, rest and relaxation fuels me. And then I'll get back I'll get back to work the next day. This is a big part of that. I think healing is a big cost payoff analysis, right? So right now, and so sometimes the overworking, there may be a payoff, right? That is part of our survival strategy or coping mechanism. But then as we start to notice that, well, actually there's more of a cost than there is a payoff, then that helps us start to renegotiate and make different choices.
I want to take more time off. It's a hard habit to break. I guess it's something that we all have to learn, though, just how to love yourself and how to take care of yourself so that you don't burn out, so you don't get further down the rabbit hole or further away from your true self, And just in modern age, it seems like everything is kind of telling us to overwork and overstimulate and just go extremes, whereas we need more consciousness, I guess, or mindfulness about ourselves and who we are.
Well, and some of healing, and I agree, some of healing is having a repair experience, right? I'm thinking of a client who, also an entrepreneur, and they started to locate that sense of rest and safety, and that freaked them out. They're like, wait, how am I going to continue to run my business if I'm relaxed? Like, they hadn't computed that in their brain, that they can still succeed, they can still grow their business without being in that hypervigilant state of fight and flight 24/7. So again, like the seaplane, they kind of would find that rest and then bounce out because their brain is still telling them, nope, I can't survive, I can't thrive down here. I have to bounce back up to the default. So it's kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You're kind of doing this renegotiation. But, after a year where her business was still growing and she was continuing to, get better sleep and have better boundaries and, take more breaks, she's like, oh, actually, I can be relaxed without killing myself and still be okay in the world. So I think a lot of healing is deriving a sense of okayness, right? A sense of okayness in ourselves. And that's time and practice.
Yeah. Have you read the book, The Big Leap? I think but it has to do with the upper limits, right? So you hit down your bottom and then you hit your upper limits. So I'd love to hear your theory on how do we break through our upper limits, or how do we make our standards higher, I guess, and keep growing and expand?
I mean, I think for me, in relationship to healing, it's doing that cost payoff analysis, and then the cost becomes too great and where we're stuck, and then we're willing to take that risk for that payoff, but then the trauma piece is like, well, the risk is like, what are all the perceived threats when I break through that upper limit, right? And really, tracking, all of the ways the mind catastrophizes. Well, this, and this, and then the limiting beliefs and the behaviors, and really mapping that out. And then it's like, all right, well, if I were to believe something else is possible, what would that look like? What would that feel like? What behaviors and beliefs might be organized around that? And then starting to take those action steps, right? So as much as I think a lot of this is an inside game in terms of mapping mindset, then where do we make that practical out in the world, right? So how do we take those action steps? And for me, I think it's a big piece around community too. As humans, we're social creatures. So we're not meant to live in isolation. When it comes to trauma, the imprints of trauma have us feeling even more isolated and alone. So we can't heal in isolation, but in terms of breaking through upper limits, whether it's, business, personal, professional, having mentors, coaches, friends, colleagues that can hold that vision with you, right? And so it's good to have people on our side, people who believe in us, and then just as much, that helps us shore up that belief in ourselves.
I love what you said about mapping it out. I think, and that's actually like a really big epiphany. I feel like whenever you're at the bottom, right? I call them like the mountains and canyons, right? So if you're at the bottom of the canyon, you should be mapping out, what are your dreams down there? What are the things you're aspiring to? And then when you're at the top, you should also be mapping out, what are the fears that I have right now at this level? What are the things that are trying to pull me back down? And then if you map them out consciously or write them down, then you know what's going on so that maybe you can keep climbing higher or do something where I think that's pretty powerful, man. And then also having mentors and coaches is always an important thing. That's cool, man. So I think the whole world is needing some advice on mental health. So I think we're all going through interesting times everywhere. There's a lot of stress. I think people need some hope or something. But like if people are having a hard time with mental health, like what would be your advice to the listeners out there and just people around that maybe need some help?
I think right now we're treating mental health as if it's an individual problem. So if we're struggling with anxiety or depression, we think something's wrong with us. And so I kind of like to flip the switch on that. Like, what if our own anxiety and depression is a healthy response to a pretty troubled world?
Yeah.
So what if it's a sign of our own system? Because I think there's just so much shame and stigma around mental health. But, if your check engine light goes off, you either open up the hood and take a look inside on your own, or you bring it to a mechanic to get it looked at if you don't have those skills and tools. We don't do that readily when it comes to, our mental and emotional health. So that's a big thing, to kind of take the stigma out of it and look at it more as like a community issue, a collective issue. Not to say we still can't get individual personal support, but I also think a lot of healing happens on much more of a community-centric level. I think the other piece is we're busy chasing symptoms. I think we've been bought and sold that chemical imbalance is the cause of mental illness. And, research actually hasn't proven that. And it's very reductive because it's not taking into account that trauma and, early childhood attachment are big components of mental health, and we can actually heal these patterns, and then chemical imbalance can resolve itself. So I think when we're taught that we just have to treat chemical imbalance, it kind of takes it takes our power away, our agency away, because then we think we have to just treat this one thing, and that's all there is to it, when there's so many pieces that we could be supporting to kind of take the power back into our own hands to heal. So that's a big piece. And, and I get that, pain and symptom management is sometimes necessary. But I think we've been taught that pain and symptom management is healthcare, and it's not. It's sick care, and it's not. Again, sometimes it's necessary, but it's not actually going to address, that's just shooting the tip of the iceberg, and it's not addressing the many causative factors that are beneath the surface that really need to be tended to, right? And that's kind of what you were speaking into, just taking that pause to be with your emotions, right? And then the mapping of that, because when people come to me, it's like there's just like these huge clouds of anxiety and depression and pain. And over the course of our work together, it's like we start to like look at what are the micro weather patterns in there. Oh, well, this experience from early development, and then this, failed relationship, and then this, partnership that blew up in my, company. And it's like, and the emotions and the beliefs that all got magnified and, imprinted around all those experiences, and start to kind of, take a magnifying glass to understand how all of these lived experiences have made their mark. And and they can make their mark for better or for worse. And I think healing helps them make their mark where we can derive resilience and significance from these experiences that otherwise might calcify and really harden us.
Because then we get stuck in habit loops of thinking about these things, feeling these things, and using that's intense. So I want to talk a little bit about identity. So for sales, right, I would create a fake identity to sell more, right, to make more money. So it was kind of an interesting paradigm shift to like make up a fake character in my head and have them act out stuff. I'm just wondering, when you're healing people, do you think that is a healthy way, or does that cause issues? Like if do you go back into the trauma when it happened and then make up a fake story of how it happened better? And is that a way of healing? Or is it healthy to have weird identities to do more or to think more? Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah. So just a couple things from what you shared. First, as much as I help people heal trauma, I actually don't focus on trauma. My work is to help people just reconnect to their own innate wisdom. Innate wisdom was a term that was developed in chiropractic. So it's the healing mechanism that, let's say, when we get a paper cut, it sends platelets and proteins and orchestrates all these biochemical transmissions to heal the paper cut. And it's doing that without us having to think about it. So much healing can happen without us having to think about it, by just getting us reconnected to that innate wisdom. So that's my job, right? Cool. So the more we're connected to our innate wisdom, I find we are just living more in our authenticity, more in our truth, more in our power. And I think that helps us locate kind of just more of a direct experience of who we are. Whereas when we're organized around, when our identity is organized around trauma, then our identity is probably organized around a lot of guarding, protecting, wounding, pain, limitation, contraction, right? And once we get plugged back into our innate wisdom, then all of that falls away. And for me, then identity is just presence. And so, I do think there's power in visualization, in terms of, like, who am I in the embodiment of a regulated nervous system? Okay, I'm present. Who am I in the embodiment of, whatever it may be? So we may have an idea of what type of qualities we want to live into, what we want to habit. And I think it can be tricky if we again get identified to those qualities. I think we don't want to identify, because I think, and that's another shortcoming, I think, around trauma, when we think our identity is fixed. And I think identity is a moment to moment lived experience, where that keeps us open to like a life that's full of change and that's very dynamic and that's just very present moment. And that's, I find we locate our greatest power from that presence.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. I'm glad you said that. It's interesting. Like, identity is the biggest problem, because I feel like we manifest whatever we are, right? So if we identify with something, if we say, I am this statement, I am anxious or I am depressed, like those are very harsh things that we need to break away from, be like, oh, right now, this is what's happening in this current moment. But I love the innate wisdom. And I did another podcast with someone who mentioned something, and I'd kind of like to get your perspective, but he said, so connect back to your innate wisdom. And then whenever you feel that, like that good vibe in your body, thinking about something, that's the direction that you should go in your life, as opposed to doing a lot of other things. But it's like connecting to your innate wisdom and then finding that energy. And when you feel that energy, you're on the right track. And it's kind of like a compass. I thought that was a very cool insight. I'm just wondering if you have more about the innate wisdom and what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that the more we're aligning with innate wisdom, the more we're aligned to a flow state. That flow state, we can align with it. And I think there's both a balance of following it and guiding it, right? And so there can be, I like to kind of ride the tension of both intention and attention, right? And so we can have intention in terms of, who we want to be. We can call upon archetypes in terms of the qualities we want to cultivate and develop. And I think also just taking the foot off the gas of intention and riding with attention, just paying attention to what is. Because often paying attention to what is being present to the roadblocks and the obstacles that can get in the way of that intention, which we don't want to bypass. We need to be conscious of those aspects. And so, I think intention helps us to take some aligned action, but attention helps us find the alignment. And I think a balance of two help us find that flow state. And that's cool. An alignment with innate wisdom. And that's our healing power. That's our agency.
Yeah, to guide us and know where we want to go. First, we have to want to get healed. Some people identify with their sickness. It's kind of sad, and they don't get to the point where they just say, oh, this is what I am now. And then they get all these drugs to like put Band-Aids on it when it's not actually healing the problem. Anybody listening out there that needs to get healed, hit up Greg. We'll get you to that next level. I want to know a little bit about what is the PRISMA method? What does that mean?
Yeah, so PRISMA I developed over the last many years, really on my journey healing myself. So today I'm 3 inches taller than I was 25 years ago. That was unraveling a lot of trauma stored in the body that was tied into just debilitating chronic pain, anxiety, and depression. And, I found most traditional approaches to therapy were ill-equipped to address the trauma stored in my body and how it was impacting my physical health. And so I started to kind of get curious. And I was first introduced to energy medicine kind of by serendipity. I wasn't raised in a household where energy medicine was, a part of the vocabulary. So it was very new to me. But when I was introduced to energy medicine, I realized I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. Started studying that for a good 4 years. And then that led me to meditation and mindfulness. So I spent a good year in India, deepening into a meditation practice. And then as I started to come back to the States, I was studying yoga and Ayurveda. And that led me to kind of fusing all these practices together. And then as I was teaching them, I moved to San Francisco 9 years ago. One of my first students was a therapist. And She said, "Do you realize you're teaching a trauma-informed approach to healing?" I knew I was healing my own trauma, but I hadn't studied trauma at that point. And so, trauma-informed lens wasn't even my vocabulary. So I started studying with her. She was teaching trauma at the California Institute of Integral Studies for the therapy department. So I became her teacher's assistant. So yeah, that was when I started to bring in like the trauma and neuroscience piece. So PRISMA fuses all these pieces together. There's a trauma and neuroscience roadmap. I find a lot of people are on a path of healing, but not really sure where they are or where they're headed. So they're kind of traveling blindfolded. And then the somatic and mindfulness-based practices are literally the mind training that, help us shift from orientating to pain to possibility. And then the energy medicine piece is what's helping to heal, the imprints of trauma stored in the body that we can't otherwise think or talk our way through. So fusing all of those pieces is, the precise tools that I've found most meaningful and relevant to heal myself, and that I've been sharing with, clients and students for the last 18 years.
That's cool. So you went to India and you just went on a heal yourself kind of journey around the world. Is that what happened? It sounds interesting.
My first energy medicine teacher had studied with a teacher there. So I was in a meditation community for a good 8 months and just learning just dozens of different techniques and meditations and meditative therapies that were really designed to help us let go of the accumulation of stress and tension in the body, right? And so there's something to be said for working tension through the body, where we can then find a greater ability to just be at rest within ourselves. So I don't think, not all meditation is equal, and some meditation not trauma informed. Some meditation is going to, activate more trauma than help heal it. So I've pieced together all these, practices in a way that's helping us kind of meet and work with trauma in, the most meaningful, effective way possible.
Could you explain what a good meditation to help people's trauma would look like, or how do you do it?
Sometimes that's going to be physical, sometimes literally just shaking, right? I share grounding and modulation practices that are very useful when we're in a triggered state, right? When we've lost access to logic and reason, and we're in that fight, flight, freeze, or appease. Right. And those are going to help us when the nervous system is flooded to kind of come back to a baseline. So literally shaking the body is a really good way to do that, and once we've come back to a baseline, kind of what you were speaking into earlier, the idea of just being able to just pause, notice. And then, I forget the exact word you used, but, we want to accept what is. I feel like so much of our pain we're fighting against, right? And some of my wounding in my earlier years of healing, it felt like there was a monster living inside of me, right? That I was literally at odds with, fighting with. I mean, it took me a lot of time to understand that the part of me that I was fighting against was actually just the wounded part of me that actually needed a lot of love and support, right? So acknowledging what is with compassion, right? Setting aside judgment and really understanding that these survival strategies are trying to protect us. So what we're fighting against are these sacred guardians that we want to develop a reverence for, an appreciation for, and then an understanding for. And when we can understand what these survival strategies are trying to do for us, we can find other ways to, do that for ourselves. So then we're less at the effect of the survival brain and, more at the cause of our lives.
Right. Use mindfulness and consciousness to outthink the monkey brain that we all have that kind of gets trapped in us.
But the energy medicine piece is the biggest component of my practice, because that's going to calm the cardiovascular system. There's a marked increase in white blood cell activity, so it boosts immunity, and it's a fast track to shifting from sympathetic fight flight to parasympathetic rest and digest. That's a really key component of how I'm helping people heal, is working with energy medicine, because just with a very basic hands-on application, we can bypass the brain and just help the system kind of shift into, a more regulated state.
What does energy medicine, what does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah. So, there's different approaches to energy medicine. There's Reiki. I practice an energy medicine called Body Talk. And without getting into the the nuts and bolts of those systems, I kind of like the analogy of like a symphony orchestra. And so when the body is in balance, the brain, the heart, the tissues, the cells, the muscles, the hormones, the emotions, the thoughts are all just in this harmonic resonance, right? And we're just making sweet music. There's balance, there's harmony, there's rhythm. And then we have stress, we have trauma, we have environmental and hereditary influences that just start to, break up that symphony orchestra. And so then the different parts start to kind of forget that they're playing together. The nervous system gets flooded and short-circuited, and we start to create a lot of noise. So energy medicine is just going in, and again, kind of that idea of the innate wisdom. It's connecting us back to the innate wisdom that knows that all these parts are part of the same orchestra, and it just starts to break up the noise. So instead of trying to treat the noise or fix the noise, it's just helping the symphony orchestra remember that it's one harmonic, cohesive unit instead of all these separate parts. So it's really just a remembrance of our wholeness. And again, that happens without us having to think our way through it. Once our heart rate calms, once our nervous system regulates, it's like we just come back to ourselves, right? We just are like, oh, I'm not like so scattered. I'm not all over the place. I'm present. I can breathe.
Yeah.
So
that's powerful. I gotta say one more thing. So you grew 3 inches. How did that happen?
So yeah, my spine unraveled. It wasn't a one and done. It was my second energy medicine session that I, again, if we're the symphony orchestra in that session, some hormones and some emotions and memories were balanced. The connective tissue is what kind of pulls on and holds the muscles and bones together.
Right. So it's just real tight.
The connective tissue is also where we store all of our emotions, memories, thoughts, beliefs, and traumas. So the connective tissue kind of becomes like the costuming we wear. So the costuming I was wearing was very much that I need to protect myself from a very dangerous world. There's a lot of, harm out there that I need to guard from. So if that's the overarching identity, posture, framework, and, guiding force of, my body, brain, my nervous system, my whole skeletal system started to reflect that, right? So as we were breaking up the noise, helping my system locate safety, connection, continuity, then the spine that was held by these beliefs in the connective tissue started to kind of find a new organizational intelligence that was less afraid, that was less guarding and less protective. So then the physical structure of my spine no longer had to reflect that, right?
Whoa.
So some of that unraveling, happened in that first session, maybe like a ½ inch, and my spine cracked and I was a little like lightheaded, and it's like, let me like hold on to the chair here. Let me hold on to my seat. But then, I'd say my spine's still unraveling. I don't live in, chronic pain. There's still a curve in my spine. It's just not nearly as severe as it used to be. So as I continue to like sit in mindfulness and, find movement that helps me kind of feel open and alive and powerful in my body, that just continues to unravel.
Well, I'm glad you were able to heal yourself, man. That's awesome. Yeah, I think you definitely got to move the energy. You got to, first you got to commit to a healthy lifestyle and a healing lifestyle that you're going to get better, and then you got to move your energy. You got to find your inner wisdom. Lots of good gems that we dropped today, man. So I got 2 questions that I kind of ask everybody who comes on the show. But before we get into that, what would be the best way for listeners and the audience out there to connect with you and kind of come into your world?
Yeah. PRISMAmethod.com if you want to join the online course and community where you kind of are learning all of the different tools and practices to have a healing practice for life. GregWhiting.com if you want to learn a little bit more about me. I have limited space to take on one-on-one clients, and that's, diving into like a very committed arc of transformation over 9 to 12 months. So that's GregWhiting.com.
Who's kind of your customer avatar that you help? Is it just depression, anxiety? What do they kind of look like?
Yeah, it's a combination. Often those two go hand in hand, and the chronic pain is often a component. But some people will come for just one of those, but they usually have an understanding that unresolved trauma is beneath that. So we're going to work with the trauma component. With that, I have clients with migraines. I have clients with autoimmune disease, because autoimmune disease is like the immune system attacking itself. So it's often coming from a place that, oh, I feel a threat in the world. And so then that's being mirrored in the immune system. But yeah, primarily anxiety, depression, chronic pain, all symptomatic of trauma is, what brings people to me.
Well, you're doing good work, man. It's people don't get recognized enough when you're healing people's traumas and stuff like that, because it's hard to heal people, but it's also it's important, so you're making a difference in people's lives, which is powerful. So the first question that I ask people that come on the show is, what motivates you? What really gets you fired up? What kind of gets you going?
Yeah. I mean, I've always been just purpose driven, very passionate. Before the work I do now, I was working in the nonprofit world. And so I'm just always on a mission. I think I'm just always asking, like, how can I be of greatest service? So service really drives me. And then with that, nature, not
Yeah.
nature, music, just life. It's all connected.
Yeah.
My work and my creativity is not really separate from who I am personally. So
It's awesome. Do what you love. And then the second one, the keyword is kind of impact, but like, what's one habit or discipline that you started doing daily or continuously and really had an impact on your life? And you can really tell, like, since I did this, something happened.
yeah. I mean, I'll sound like a broken record, but it's literally everything I share in PRISMA. It's trauma and neuroscience, it's somatic and mindfulness-based practices, it's energy medicine, that also then tons of non-negotiables around sleep, around, movement, whether that's dance, whether that's lifting weights, whether that's swimming, whether that's hiking, whether that's yoga, community, friends, connections, and then nature, music, all these are just total non-negotiables. Really good food.
It's always funny when you hear, like, because we read all the books, we do all the things to help ourselves, and it's just like, come back to the simple stuff that you enjoy doing that's good for you. Like, just do the good things and do less of the bad things. And you're going to start healing, you're going to start feeling better, life's going to be more enjoyable. Well, we really went through a lot, man. It was really powerful today. Do you have any last thoughts before we kind of wrap it up?
Well, just something you touched on before, just around movement, and I look at disease and illness as stagnation, right? Like trauma creates these calcified imprints that hold us. And so, but then with a lot of how we suppress symptoms and chase symptoms and treat symptoms, we do more of stagnating, right? So health and healing is movement, right? And healing is expression. So we don't want to suppress, we want to express. And that's a big part of what the energy medicine component does.
That's huge. That's like almost everything in life. It's like, if you're stagnant in your life, you're going to start feeling sick. You're going to start feeling issues. Like, even if you got to go out and do new things, you got to see the spice of life, or whatever it is, the variety out there. You can't stay stagnant. That's amazing. That was a good mic drop, man. I appreciate you. Well, definitely everybody listening, feel free to reach out to Greg. He's got a really great course. So is it PRISMAmethod.com?
PRISMAmethod.com. That's it.
Yeah, that'll be in the show notes down below. Be sure to check that out. We'll keep on healing and keep on feeling good, people. So have a good day. Thanks, Greg, for coming on.
Thanks, Robert.
All right. Talk to you guys in the next one.